What would you do if silence felt wrong? If a quiet house hid something that shouldn't exist? Behind an ordinary fence, a German shepherd was growing weaker by the day. No barking, no cries, just a cage, and time slipping away. Why would someone starve a dog and record it? Why did one former U.S. Marine stop when everyone else passed by? Was it instinct? Was it conscience? Or was it God answering a prayer through the only person willing to look closer? What happened next will test your heart and your faith in humanity. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe evil can't hide when the right soul is paying attention, subscribe and stay with us. Late afternoon heat pressed down on the quiet suburban road, the kind that made the air feel thick and unmoving, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The former Marine slowed his truck without fully understanding why. The engine hummed softly beneath him, steady and familiar, but his hands tightened on the steering wheel as a sensation crept up his spine, an old, unwelcome instinct he had never managed to unlearn. It was the same feeling he used to get seconds before an ambush, before something went wrong in a place that looked calm on the surface. His name was Daniel Cross, 36 years old, recently discharged after 12 years in the U.S. Marine Corps. He had the build of someone who had carried weight for too long. Broad shoulders, slightly rounded forward muscle, dense rather than showy strength, pulled inward instead of displayed. His face was angular cheekbones, sharp beneath sun-weathered skin, with a narrow scar cutting through the edge of his right eyebrow, souvenir from shrapnel, not a story he liked to tell. A short beard shadowed his jaw, dark with a few early threads of gray, and his eyes were a muted steel blue that rarely stayed relaxed for long. Daniel wasn't on patrol anymore. He wasn't on duty at all. He had been driving home from a hardware store, thinking about nothing more important than replacing a broken fence panel. But the sensation refused to fade. His gaze drifted toward the large house on the right side of the road, a modern structure half hidden behind tall hedges and an iron gate painted a clean, expensive black. That was when he saw the cage. It sat far back in the yard, almost deliberately placed where it wouldn't be visible from the street unless someone was looking for it. A steel enclosure, industrial, and reinforced the kind meant for containment, not shelter. At first glance, it looked empty. Daniel might have driven past if something hadn't moved inside. A dog. A German shepherd, full-grown, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, though it was hard to tell beneath the damage starvation had done. Its coat, once likely thick and proud, clung unevenly to a body stripped down to bone and sinew. Ribs stood out sharply beneath the fur, each breath pulling them into painful relief. The dog lay on its side, not resting, not sleeping, simply conserving what little energy remained. What struck Daniel most was not the animal's condition, but its silence. The dog did not bark. It did not rise. It did not even lift its head. Its eyes, dark amber dulled, but still frighteningly alert, stayed locked on the front gate, unblinking, as if waiting for something that had failed to arrive again and again. There was no confusion in that stare, only expectation worn thin by repetition. Daniel parked the truck. The heat outside wrapped around him as he stepped onto the pavement. He closed the door quietly, instinctively, and stood there for a moment listening. No shouting, no music, no signs of life from the house itself. The yard was unnervingly clean, too clean. He moved closer to the gate. Inside the cage, a metal bowl lay tipped on its side, bone dry. Another bowl, once meant for food, had been kicked toward the back corner, its contents long since spoiled gray-green with mold. Flies hovered lazily above it. The concrete floor beneath the dog was bare, stained dark in places, from old spills that had dried and cracked under the sun. Then Daniel noticed the chain. It was attached to a thick collar around the dog's neck. The leather cracked and worn, as if it had never been removed. The chain itself was short, too short. Short enough that the dog could not stand fully upright without choking itself. Short enough that lying down required curling into an unnatural angle to avoid pulling against its own throat. Daniel felt something tighten behind his ribs. This wasn't neglect. Neglect was forgetting. Neglect was ignorance. This was measured, intentional, controlled. His jaw clenched as memory flickered uninvited across his mind, faces from overseas prisoners tied too close to walls, bodies rationed just enough food to keep them alive, but weak. He had seen this logic before, dressed up in different language, justified with different excuses. The dog shifted slightly, sensing movement. Its ears twitched, but did not lift. When its eyes met Daniel's fully, there was no aggression there. No warning, only a quiet, exhausted awareness. Daniel raised his hands slowly, palms open even though the dog hadn't moved. "It's okay," he murmured the words, instinctive, rough with disuse. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, softer than he expected. The dog's chest rose and fell in shallow bursts. Its gaze flicked briefly to the chain, then back to Daniel, as if checking the distance between hope and punishment. That look hit him harder than anything else. Daniel glanced toward the house. Still nothing. Curtains drawn, windows dark. He crouched slightly, testing the gate. Locked, heavy, well-maintained. This wasn't a place where things happened by accident. As he leaned closer, he spotted something small mounted to the cage's support beam, a camera, discreet angle downward. A red indicator light blinked steadily. Recording. A bitter, humorless exhale escaped him. Of course it was. Whoever owned this dog didn't just want control. They wanted documentation, proof of obedience, evidence of power. Daniel straightened, heart beating a little faster now, but not with fear, with clarity. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, snapping photos through the bars, wide shots, close-ups, the chain, the bowls, the dog's condition, the blinking red light. He moved deliberately, methodically, the way he had been trained to gather intelligence when the situation was still quiet. The dog watched him the entire time. Not with trust, not yet, but with something dangerously close to it. Daniel knelt again, lowering himself to the dog's level. He didn't touch the cage. He didn't reach through the bars. He knew better than to rush an animal that had learned pain from human hands. "I see you," he said quietly. The dog's ears lifted a fraction this time, just enough to prove it was still listening. Behind Daniel, the house remained silent, but the sense of being watched crawled along his spine again. Whoever lived here hadn't stepped outside yet. Maybe they were gone. Maybe they were watching through a screen, confident that no one would interfere. Daniel rose to his feet slowly. He wasn't supposed to be here. He had no badge, no authority. But standing there staring at a living creature, reduced to a calculation of suffering, he felt something settle into place with grim certainty. He wasn't leaving. Not this time. Daniel climbed the fence without hesitation. The metal spikes scraped his palms, drawing thin lines of blood, but he barely registered the pain. His boots hit the grass on the other side with a dull thud, the sound swallowed immediately by the unnatural stillness of the yard. Everything here looked carefully maintained, trimmed hedges, spotless, concrete order, imposed with precision. It felt wrong, too controlled, too quiet. The German shepherd sensed him before he spoke. The dog's body tightened, every visible muscle, trembling beneath skin, stretched thin from hunger. Its ears flattened against its skull, not in warning, but in anticipation. When Daniel crouched near the cage, the dog recoiled slightly, shoulders curling inward, as if bracing for something it had learned to expect whenever a human came close. That reaction cut deeper than any scar Daniel carried. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly, keeping his voice low even. He stayed where he was, letting the dog see him, clearly, letting time do some of the work. "I promise." The dog did not move closer. It did not move away either. Its eyes, clouded with exhaustion, but still painfully aware, tracked every shift of Daniel's weight, every movement of his hands. This was an animal that had learned survival through observation, not trust. Daniel reached for the lock. It was solid, heavy-duty, built to endure weather and force. The kind of lock meant for containment, not care. He tested it once, then again. No give. From his pocket he pulled out the compact multi-tool he carried out of habit more than necessity, its edges worn smooth from years of use. He had opened worse things under worse conditions. The metallic click of the tool made the dog flinch. Daniel froze instantly. The chain around the dog's neck rattled as it shifted claws, scraping faintly against the concrete floor. Its breathing quickened shallow and uneven. Daniel lowered himself further, bringing his face closer to the bars, making himself smaller instead of looming. "It's okay," he murmured. "Nothing bad is happening right now." He worked the lock slowly, deliberately, giving the dog time to adjust to each sound. When the mechanism finally gave way with a muted snap, Daniel did not pull the door open all at once. He eased it outward just enough to create space, then positioned himself between the opening and the dog. The German shepherd tried to stand. Its front legs shook violently, joints locking for a brief, terrifying second before collapsing. The sound it made wasn't a cry, just a harsh exhale forced from lungs that no longer had the strength to support the body attached to them. Daniel moved without thinking. He slid one arm beneath the dog's chest, the other under its hindquarters, lifting carefully, keeping the spine aligned the way he had been trained to do with wounded men. The weight startled him. The dog was far too light. It sagged against him immediately, head dropping forward until it pressed into the hollow beneath his collarbone. Daniel felt the frantic flutter of its heart through the thin layer of fur, fast, irregular, panicked. The smell of starvation clung to the animal, sharp and sour, mixed with the faint metallic scent of old blood where the collar had rubbed raw for far too long. For a brief moment, the dog went completely still. Daniel's breath caught. "No," he said quietly, urgency creeping into his voice despite his effort to stay calm. He adjusted his grip, lifting the dog slightly higher to keep its airway clear. "Stay with me. Don't you quit on me now." The dog exhaled a shallow, rattling breath that barely made it past its throat, but it was enough. Daniel held still, letting the moment pass, grounding both of them. As he stepped back from the cage, his shoulder brushed against the metal support beam. That was when he saw it. Mounted at eye level, angled precisely toward the interior of the enclosure, was a small camera, no bigger than a deck of cards. Its casing was clean, recently wiped down. A red indicator light blinked steadily, patient and indifferent. Recording. Daniel followed the camera's line of sight and felt his stomach tighten. The bowls, the chain, the dog's failed attempts to stand. All of it framed, all of it documented. This wasn't hidden, Daniel muttered under his breath. This was meant to be watched. The implication settled heavily in his chest. Whoever did this hadn't acted out of neglect or loss of control. This was measured, observed, repeated. The camera wasn't there to protect the dog. It was there to monitor suffering. The dog stirred weakly in his arm's nose, pressing into Daniel's jacket, as if drawn to warmth by instinct alone. One paw twitched claws, catching lightly in the fabric. The gesture was unconscious, but it anchored Daniel in place all the same. He shifted his stance, turning away from the cage, from the camera, angling his body toward the open gate. His thumb brushed his phone in his pocket, grounding him with the knowledge that he had already captured images, proof that this was real, that it had happened. The yard remained silent. No footsteps, no voices, no intervention. Daniel scanned the house briefly, curtains drawn, windows dark. Whoever owned this place was either gone or watching from somewhere he couldn't see. He didn't wait to find out. Carefully, deliberately, Daniel lowered himself to one knee on the grass, keeping the dog supported against his chest. He eased the animal into a more secure hold, adjusting its position so its breathing remained unobstructed. "You're out," he whispered close to the dog's ear. "You're not going back in there." The German Shepherd did not lift its head. It didn't need to. Its body remained tense, as if expecting the familiar snap of a command, the yank of a chain. But when nothing followed, when the ground beneath it felt different, softer, the tension began to waver. Just a little. Daniel rose slowly, every movement controlled, and took a step toward the gate. The red light on the camera continued to blink behind him. Watching, the door to the house burst open. She came out fast, barefoot on the concrete, her movement sharp and purposeful, as if anger itself had pulled her forward. The first thing she looked at was not Daniel and not the open gate. It was the empty space where the cage door should have been closed. Her breath hitched for half a second. Then her face hardened. Her name was Elena Ward. Elena was in her early 40s, tall and narrow-hipped, her posture rigid in a way that suggested discipline mistaken for strength. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight knot at the back of her head, severe enough to pull the skin at her temples smooth. She had pale, carefully maintained skin, untouched by sun or softness, and eyes the color of dull ice eyes that evaluated, measured, and dismissed rather than felt. Even now, her expression carried no panic for the animal that had disappeared from her control. Only outrage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she shouted. Daniel had already lowered the German Shepherd to the grass near the open gate. He kept one knee on the ground, one arm wrapped firmly around the dog's chest, the other steadying its hind legs. The dog's body leaned into him instinctively, as if the absence of pain felt suspicious temporary. Elena didn't look at the dog. She pointed at Daniel instead, her hand trembling slightly, not with fear, but with fury. "You broke into private property. You vandalized my enclosure. That dog is mine." Daniel stood slowly, positioning himself between her and the German Shepherd without making it obvious. His face remained unreadable, jaw set, eyes calm in a way that unsettled people used to dominance. "He's starving," Daniel said. "He's dehydrated. He can barely stand." Elena scoffed a sharp, humorless sound. "That's called conditioning." He was aggressive, disobedient. This was the only method that worked. Her voice was clinical, practiced the tone of someone who had repeated this justification, often enough to believe it. She stepped closer, close enough now that Daniel could smell expensive citrus perfume layered over antiseptic soap. "You have no idea how difficult that animal is," she continued. "Food is leverage. Hunger teaches focus. If you'd stayed out of it, he'd be compliant by now. At the sound of her voice, the German Shepherd reacted immediately. Its body stiffened. A low tremor ran through its frame. It tried to press closer to Daniel's leg claws, digging weakly into the grass, head lowering, as if bracing for something that had followed that tone many times before. The response was automatic. Learned. Daniel noticed. Elena did not. "You see," she said, gesturing toward the dog without looking at it. "He knows who's in charge." Daniel's hands curled slowly into fists at his sides. "No," he said quietly. "He knows who hurts him." That made her pause. For the first time, her eyes flicked toward the dog. Not with concern, with irritation. As if it had embarrassed her by being visibly broken in front of a stranger. She stepped forward again. Daniel shifted with her, blocking her path without touching her. His stance widened slightly, subtle but unmistakable. "A barrier. Back away," he said. Elena laughed sharp and disbelieving. "You don't get to give orders here." She reached into the pocket of her fitted jacket, pulling out her phone with a practiced motion. "I'm calling the police. Trespassing. Theft. Assault if you touched him." Her fingers moved quickly, too quickly. The phone slipped. It hit the concrete with a sharp crack and slid to a stop near Daniel's boot. The screen lit up instantly, bright and undeniable. A video filled the display, the steel cage, the short chain, the dog collapsing again and again. A red dot blinked in the corner of the screen. Recording. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Daniel bent down and picked up the phone. Elena's face changed. The rage vanished, replaced by something colder and far more dangerous calculation. "That's not what it looks like," she said immediately. "You're seeing fragments, out of context." Daniel didn't respond. He tilted the phone slightly, scrolling. Dates, times, dozens of clips. The camera angles changed from day to day, but the pattern didn't. The bowls were always empty, the chain always short, the dog's movements slower each time. Elena took a step back. "You don't understand behavioral modification," she said, voice tight now. "People like you always confuse cruelty with discipline." Daniel looked up at her. "I've seen discipline," he said. "This isn't it." The German Shepherd shifted again, lifting its head just enough to look at the phone in Daniel's hand. The red light reflected faintly in its eyes. Elena noticed. Her composure cracked. "Put that down," she snapped, stepping forward again, reaching out. "That's private." Daniel raised the phone slightly out of her reach. "You documented everything he said. Why?" Her mouth opened, closed. For the first time, she had no answer ready. The silence stretched. The dog exhaled shakily, leaning harder into Daniel's leg, as if sensing the shift in power. Somewhere inside the house, a clock ticked loudly, each second amplified by the absence of shouting. Daniel slipped the phone into his pocket. "I'm not giving him back," he said. Elena's face twisted, anger returning in force. "You don't have that right." Daniel met her gaze, steady and unyielding. "Neither did you." Behind them, the red light on the camera inside the cage continued to blink, patient, indiscriminate, recording a control that was finally slipping away. The first siren cut through the quiet street like a blade. Daniel did not move when he heard it. He stayed where he was, one hand resting firmly on the German Shepherd's shoulder fingers spread just enough to feel the dog's uneven breathing. The animal had stopped trembling, but its muscles remained rigid, coiled with the expectation that safety was temporary. Daniel understood that feeling intimately. Two patrol cars pulled up almost at the same time. The first officer to step out was Officer Mark Reynolds, a man in his early 40s with a stocky build and a permanent crease between his eyebrows. His dark hair was cropped short, already thinning at the crown, and a rough salt and pepper beard framed a face shaped by years of night shifts and too little sleep. He moved cautiously, eyes scanning the scene before him, instinct sharpened by a career that had taught him how quickly calm situations could turn volatile. The second was Officer Sarah Whitmore. Sarah was tall and lean with a runner's build and long auburn hair pulled into a low ponytail beneath her cap. Her skin was freckled from years in the sun, and her expression, soft at first glance, hardened instantly when she saw the condition of the dog. She had the posture of someone alert, even when standing still, shoulders squared, weight balanced. Daniel would later learn she'd grown up on a rural property, raised around working animals, and cruelty toward them hit her harder than most. "What's going on here?" Reynolds asked, voice controlled but sharp. Daniel stood slowly, careful not to startle the dog. "That animal was locked in a steel cage without food or water," he said. "There's video evidence, days of it." Elena Ward tried to interrupt her voice, rising in sharp bursts, but Sarah lifted a hand without looking at her. "Ma'am," Sarah said coolly, "you'll have your turn." Sarah crouched down in front of the German Shepherd, keeping a respectful distance. Her eyes traced the visible ribs, the raw skin beneath the collar, the way the dog leaned subtly toward Daniel instead of away. "Oh my God," she whispered, the words barely audible. Reynolds approached the cage next. Inside, the camera's red light still blinked steadily. He followed its angle, then looked back at Daniel. "You said this was recording." Daniel nodded. "Still is." Reynolds radioed for an evidence technician while Sarah documented the scene with her body camera, narrating quietly but precisely. Bowls, chain length, cage dimensions, dog's condition, nothing emotional, everything factual. When the footage from the cage camera was reviewed on site, silence fell over the group. The video played in short clips, time-stamped, dated. The dog pacing weakly, the food bowl removed, water spilled deliberately, the chain shortened one notch at a time. Each clip showed a little less strength, a little less resistance. Sarah clenched her jaw. "This isn't neglect," she said. "This is deliberate deprivation." Reynolds nodded grimly. "Pattern behavior, repeated, documented." Elena's composure unraveled quickly after that. She began pacing, hands twisting together, voice cracking as she tried to reframe the evidence. "Those clips don't show the full process. There were rules, structure. I was correcting behavior." Reynolds turned to her slowly. "You documented days of starvation." Elena shook her head, eyes darting. "He was fed, just not rewarded every day." "That's not how feeding works," Sarah said flatly. An evidence technician arrived and secured the camera, carefully detaching it from the cage support. As they worked, another officer searched the property. Moments later, they emerged from a detached storage shed. "There's a notebook," the officer said. It was brought out in a clear evidence bag. The notebook was plain, spiral-bound, its cover smudged with dirt. Inside, the handwriting was neat, controlled, almost clinical. Day 7, no food. Resistance decreased after sunset. Day 12, water only after full compliance. Day 18, chain shortened. Subject remains alert but weaker. Sarah stared at the pages, her face pale now. "She wrote this like a training log," she said. Daniel watched Elena as the words were read aloud. The woman's confidence collapsed in stages. anger giving way to fear, fear giving way to something close to panic. "I was trying to fix him," Elena said weakly. "You don't understand how dangerous he was." Daniel finally spoke again. "He couldn't stand," he said. "That's not dangerous. That's dying." The German shepherd shifted at the sound of his voice, lifting its head slightly. Sarah noticed immediately. "Hey," she said, gently lowering herself again. "Easy, buddy." The dog glanced at her, then back to Daniel, as if weighing unfamiliar kindness against learned caution. Sarah nodded once, understanding. She didn't reach out. Animal control arrived shortly after, led by Thomas Green, a thin man in his 50s, with wire-rimmed glasses and deep lines around his mouth. His gray hair was unkempt. His uniform rumpled, but his hands were steady as he assessed the dog's condition. "He needs emergency care," Thomas said quietly. "Severe malnutrition, dehydration, possibly organ stress." Daniel felt a tightness in his chest, loosen just a fraction. "I'll take him." Reynolds looked at him. "You're willing?" Daniel met his gaze. "Yes." The paperwork moved quickly after that. Elena was handcuffed, her earlier protests reduced to broken pleas and accusations. As she was led toward the patrol car, she twisted once more toward the cage, the notebook, the officers. "You're making a mistake," she said hoarsely. No one answered. Daniel carried the German shepherd toward his truck, moving carefully, feeling the dog's weight shift slightly, as if it were finally allowing itself to be held. Sarah watched them go, her expression tight but resolute. "He won't survive if he goes back," she said quietly to Reynolds. Reynolds nodded. "He won't." As Daniel opened the truck door and settled the dog onto a blanket he'd spread across the back seat, the animal exhaled a long, uneven breath that sounded almost like relief. The truth had been seen, and it could no longer be buried behind steel bars and excuses. The veterinary clinic smelled of antiseptic and warm fur, a strange mixture of sterility and fragile life. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, casting pale reflections on stainless steel counters and tiled floors that had seen both miracles and losses. Outside, the night had settled in, quiet and indifferent. But inside the small treatment room, time felt stretched thin, pulled tight by breath and heartbeat. The veterinarian introduced herself as Dr. Emily Carter. Emily was in her late 40s, medium height, with a sturdy, practical build shaped by years of lifting sedated animals and standing through long surgeries. Her dark brown hair was streaked with silver and pulled back into a loose bun that refused to stay neat. Fine lines framed her eyes, not from age alone, but from concentration and grief accumulated over decades of work. Her hands were steady, capable, but her gaze softened instantly when it landed on the German shepherd. She crouched beside the gurney, fingers moving gently over the dog's ribs, spine, and legs, noting every reaction or lack of one. The dog lay still, eyes half open, chest rising in shallow, uneven motions as clear fluid flowed slowly through the IV line into its foreleg. "How long has he been like this?" she asked quietly. Daniel stood a step back, arms crossed tightly over his chest, shoulders hunched as if bracing against an invisible weight. "Weeks," he said, "at least. Probably longer." Emily nodded once. She didn't question him. She didn't need to. After the blood work and scans were complete, she motioned Daniel toward her small office. The walls were lined with framed photos, dogs, cats, the occasional horse patients who had survived, and some who hadn't. She pulled up the results on her screen, the glow illuminating the tired lines in her face. "This level of malnutrition doesn't happen overnight," she said, tapping the data with one finger. Severe dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, early signs of liver and kidney stress. His body's been cannibalizing itself to stay alive. Daniel swallowed hard. Could it be accidental? He asked, though the answer was already written into his chest. Emily looked at him directly. No, she said. This is prolonged deprivation. Deliberate, measured. She paused, then added more gently. He survived because he's strong, and because someone finally intervened. When Daniel returned to the treatment room, the German Shepherd had been placed in a heated recovery kennel wrapped in clean blankets. The dog looked impossibly small, now swallowed by fabric and tubing, his once proud frame reduced to angles and shadows. A soft monitor beeped steadily beside him, marking each heartbeat like a quiet promise. Daniel pulled a chair close and sat down. He stayed there as the hours passed. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting fluids. One of them, a young technician named Lena, barely out of her 20s, with short black hair and nervous hands, paused every time she passed Daniel. She didn't speak much, only offered him water once and a sympathetic nod. She had learned early in her training that some nights were not for conversation. Daniel rested one hand on the edge of the kennel, close enough that the dog could sense him. He didn't touch, not yet. He watched the slow rise and fall of the dog's chest, counting breaths the way he once had in field hospitals overseas. At some point past midnight, the dog stirred. Its eyes fluttered open, briefly, unfocused, clouded with exhaustion and medication. Its nose twitched, testing the air. Then slowly, as if following a thread, it turned its head toward Daniel. A faint sound escaped its throat, not a whine, not a bark, just a breath shaped into something almost questioning. Daniel leaned forward. "I'm here," he said quietly. The dog's muzzle shifted inch by inch until it brushed the back of Daniel's fingers through the bars of the kennel. The contact was barely there, more imagined than real, but Daniel felt it all the same. His chest tightened, something hot and sharp pressing behind his eyes. He didn't pull away. "That's okay," he murmured. "You don't have to be strong anymore." The dog exhaled slowly, the tension in its body easing just a fraction. Its head settled back against the blanket eyes, closing again, but its paw twitched, once small, deliberate, resting against the kennel wall nearest Daniel's hand. Emily watched from the doorway, arms folded loosely across her chest. She didn't interrupt. She had learned long ago that recovery was not just biological. Some wounds closed faster when they were witnessed. By morning, the dog's vitals had stabilized slightly. Not safe, not yet, but holding. Emily reviewed the charts again, then looked at Daniel. "The records, the scans, the blood work," she said. "They corroborate everything you reported. This is medical evidence. Clear, defensible." Daniel nodded. "Good. There's still risk," she added. "Refeeding syndrome, organ failure. He'll need weeks of monitored care." "I'll do whatever it takes," Daniel said without hesitation. Emily studied him for a moment, really looked at him, the rigid posture, the exhaustion carved deep beneath discipline, the way he kept watch, as if sleeping were a luxury he didn't deserve. "I believe you," she said. Later that morning, as pale daylight filtered through the clinic windows, an officer arrived to collect copies of the medical report. The paperwork was thick, clinical, precise. Numbers, diagnoses, timelines. No emotion, no room for excuses. Daniel signed where required, his name steady on the line. The German Shepherd slept through it all, IV line humming softly, body finally allowed rest. As Daniel sat back down, the weight of the night settled over him, not crushing this time, but heavy with certainty. He had seen battlefields. He had seen men reduced to numbers on charts. He knew the language of damage. And now that language spoke clearly. This body, starved and shaking, told the truth no one could erase. Spring arrived quietly, the kind that softened mornings without announcing itself. Sunlight filtered through thin clouds, warming the small house at the edge of town where Daniel now lived. The place was modest, single-story, weathered siding, a narrow porch with peeling paint, but it breathed in a way the steel cage never could. The German shepherd lay stretched out on the wooden floor near the window. He was still lean but no longer skeletal. Muscle had begun to return along his shoulders and thighs, and his coat, once dull and brittle, now held a deep sable sheen that caught the light when he moved. He was around 4 years old, the veterinarian estimated old enough to have known structure before hunger rewrote his instincts. His ears were upright again, no longer pinned back by fear, and his amber eyes followed Daniel calmly as the man crossed the room. Daniel moved differently now. The rigid battlefield-ready tension had eased from his shoulders, though discipline still shaped every motion. He was in his late 30s, broad-shouldered, with a frame carved by years of service. A faint scar traced his jawline beneath a trimmed beard, a reminder of shrapnel from a roadside blast years earlier, an event that had ended his Marine career and left him allergic to chaos, but deeply attuned to suffering that went unnoticed. He set a bowl down on the mat by the kitchen counter. The dog didn't rush. He waited, sitting back on his haunches, eyes flicking up once to Daniel, as if asking permission that was never demanded anymore. "It's yours," Daniel said quietly. The dog approached, ate steadily, unhurried. No flinching, no glances over his shoulder. When he finished, he stepped back on his own and lay down again, head resting on his paws. The simple act still felt like a small miracle. Rehabilitation had been slow. The first weeks were about routine feeding schedules, short walks, quiet nights. The dog startled at sudden sounds, at first the click of a light switch, the thud of a closing door. But Daniel never raised his voice. He never used commands barked in anger. He spoke the way he had learned to speak to injured Marines, clear, calm, consistent. Trust was not trained into place. It was allowed to grow. Once a week, Sarah Whitmore stopped by to check in. Off duty now, she wore jeans and loose sweaters instead of her uniform, her auburn hair often falling free around her shoulders. Without the badge, she seemed softer, though the alertness never left her eyes. She brought paperwork updates, asked about progress, and always crouched down to greet the dog at eye level. "He looks good," she said one afternoon, watching him trot back from the yard with a stick held proudly in his mouth. "Different animal," Daniel nodded. He's remembering who he was. Animal Control closed the case formally 2 months later. The evidence held: medical records, video footage, the notebook. Elena Ward pled guilty to felony animal cruelty and unlawful confinement. No public apology followed, only sentencing dates and quiet removal from the community she once controlled through intimidation and manufactured authority. Daniel didn't attend the hearing. He didn't need to. What mattered stood beside him now, tail wagging slowly as the dog leaned his weight against Daniel's leg, solid and present. A new habit formed on its own. Every night after the lights went out, the German shepherd chose a spot by the front door. He didn't pace. He didn't whine. He simply lay there, head up, ears forward, as if he had accepted a post no one assigned. Daniel noticed it the first time and said nothing. Some instincts, once freed, knew exactly where they belonged. One evening, Daniel's neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn Hart, stopped by. She was a widow in her 70s, short and round, with soft gray curls and skin weathered by decades of gardening. She peered over the fence, smiling when the dog approached her calmly, tail wagging low. "He's handsome," she said. "Protector type." Daniel smiled faintly. He chose that. The dog sat beside Daniel, posture relaxed but attentive eyes tracking the street beyond the fence. Later that night, Daniel sat on the porch steps watching dusk settle in. The dog lay nearby, chin resting on Daniel's boot, warm and real. A breeze stirred the trees. Somewhere down the road, a car door slammed, and the dog's ears twitched, but he didn't retreat. Daniel rested his hand on the dog's head. The German shepherd leaned into the touch without hesitation. For a long time, neither of them moved. Freedom, Daniel realized, didn't always arrive with noise or ceremony. Sometimes it came quietly, through consistency, through safety repeated until fear lost its hold. Sometimes it came not as an escape, but as a place you could finally stay. The dog closed his eyes, and for the first time, sleep did not feel like surrender. This story reminds us that miracles do not always arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they arrive quietly through instinct, through compassion, through a person who refuses to look away. Helen cried where no one could hear her. The dog suffered behind a fence no one questioned. But God heard, and he answered not with wings, but with courage. Not with miracles that defy nature, but with people who choose to act. In our daily lives, we pass many fences. Some hide pain, some hide fear, some hide lives slowly fading in silence. We may not always be called to break chains or open cages, but we are always called to notice, to care, and to stand when something feels wrong. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone you love. You never know who needs to be reminded that hope still exists. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, or simply write Amen if you believe compassion still matters. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay with us as we share more stories of faith, courage, and quiet miracles. May God place a hedge of protection around you and your family. May He send help when you feel unheard. May He give you the strength to be someone else's answer to prayer. And may He always guide you back to the light. Amen.